My name is Fritz, and I have spent more than 30 years with my hands buried in diesel engines, most of it in a small workshop a short drive south of Stuttgart. In that time I have watched plenty of so-called unbreakable motors arrive on the back of a flatbed stone dead. I have also watched a stubborn few roll in under their own power with the odometer wrapped past numbers a petrol engine only dreams about, the owner leaning on the wing, grinning, asking me to change the oil one more time. Those second cars are the whole reason I am making this video. There are 5 diesel engines I would buy tomorrow, with 500,000 kilometers already showing, and I would drive home without a second thought. Let me start with a confession, because it sets up everything else. Early in my career, I fell for the same trap most buyers fall for. I thought the strong engine was the one with the big power figure, the one that pulled the hardest off the line. Then I spent 20 years watching which engines came back broken and which engines came back only for an oil change, and the lesson turned out to be the opposite of what the brochures sell. The engines that live forever are almost boring. They make modest power, they make it low and early, and they spend their whole lives barely trying. So before I name the 5, let me tell you the 3 things I actually look for. Because if you understand these, you can spot a survivor in any car park in the country. The first thing is a cast iron block. Heavy, old-fashioned, the kind of thing a modern accountant would shave down to save a few kilos on an emissions test. Iron does not flex and crack the way thin aluminum does after an engine has lived a hard life. The second thing is a simple fuel system. Simple enough that a careful man with a clean bench can understand the whole of it without plugging in a laptop. The fewer clever electronics standing between the fuel and the cylinder, the fewer things there are to leave you stranded on a cold morning far from home. And the third thing is a gentle state of tune. An engine asked for 150 honest horses will outlive the same block squeezed for 250 every day of the week. Give me iron, simplicity and a quiet life, and I will show you a motor that outlives its body, its gearbox and now and then its owner. Take away even one of the 3, and you have bought a clock with a fuse on it. And notice what is not on that list. It is not horsepower, and it is not the badge on the bonnet, and it is not even the year the thing was built. I have watched expensive, powerful, clever engines die in a quiet corner of my workshop, while a plain old iron lump with half the power drove itself home for another decade. So when I name these 5 for you, do not listen out for the one that sounds the most exciting. Listen instead for the one that quietly has all 3 of the things that truly matter, because that is the one that will still be running long after the others have been weighed in for scrap. So this is a countdown, and the order matters. Number 5 is still an engine I trust with my own money. Number 1 is the engine I would hand to my own son and tell him to stop worrying about cars for the next 20 years. We start at the bottom, with the most modern and the most complicated of the bunch. Number 5 is the 3-liter V6 TDI from the Volkswagen and Audi family. You will find it under the bonnet of the Audi A4, the A6, the big A8, the Q7, and in the Volkswagen Touareg and the Phaeton, and even in the Porsche Cayenne. Audi drew this one from a clean sheet, and the heart of it is the genuine article. The block and the crankshaft in the early common rail versions will take punishment that would split a cheaper engine straight down the middle. I have seen these bottom ends sail past 500,000 kilometers, and I have heard honest men swear to 700,000. It is smooth, it is strong, and it will tow a loaded trailer over a mountain pass all day without ever breathing hard. Now here is the part the showroom never puts in the window. This is also the most complicated engine on the whole list, and complication is where diesels go to die. The timing chain does not sit at the front where a mechanic can reach it in an afternoon. It sits at the back, pressed up against the gearbox. And when the guides and the tensioner wear out, the repair is long and it is costly, and it is the exact bill that sends people to the scrapyard who should have known better. On top of that, you have the modern emissions plumbing, the particulate filter and the exhaust gas valve, and the glow plugs, and all of them hate the very same thing. Short, cold, stop and start city driving. A 3-liter that crawls to the shops and back, never warming through, will clog its filter and coke up its valves and feel gutless and sorry for itself. So my advice on the 3-liter is plain, and it is a rule you can carry to any modern diesel you ever look at. Buy the one that lived on the motorway, not the one that lived in town. If the car in front of you carries a fat folder of receipts, and a previous owner did that chain before it begged twice, this is a motor that will carry you across a continent and bring you home. If the folder is thin and the history is all short hops, walk away and do not look back over your shoulder. The bottom end is a tank. It is the neglect that does the killing every single time. Number 4 wears the 3-pointed star. It is the Mercedes 2.2 CDI. The engine the factory calls the M646, and it powered a solid decade of Mercedes between 2002 and 2010. The C-Class and the E-Class your bank manager drove, the CLK Coupe, and above all the Vito vans that ran all day and half the night as taxis and delivery trucks and simply refused to stop. Depending on the year, it made somewhere between 136 and 170 horsepower, which is modest, and that is the entire point. A 4-cylinder common rail diesel asked to do very little, fed clean oil, will quietly roll past 300,000 kilometers, and the taxi fleets that ran them into the ground proved it 100,000 times over. But every engine has the one small thing that decides its fate, and on the 2.2 it is cheap, and it is ignored until it is neither. Under each injector sits a copper sealing washer. Over the years that washer hardens, combustion gas starts to weep past it, and the soot bakes into a hard black crust around the injector that the trade calls Black Death. Catch it early, and it is a Saturday morning and a handful of washers. Leave it, and that crust welds the injector solid into the cylinder head, and now you are paying for the kind of surgery that makes a grown man go quiet and stare at the floor. There is a second gremlin too, the plastic swirl flaps in the intake, which can grow brittle, snap off, and get drawn straight into a running cylinder. So when you go to look at one of these, pull the engine cover and look hard around the base of the injectors for that telltale black soot. Clean injectors and a fresh stamp for the washers, and this Benz will run 250,000 miles while its owner forgets the engine is even down there. Number 3 is the people's champion, and I suspect half of you have been waiting for it since the first word. The Volkswagen 1.9 TDI, in the shape the badge calls the ALH, built from the late 1990s into the early 2000s. It lived in the Golf Mark IV, the Jetta, the New Beetle, and the early Passat. It made all of 90 to 110 horsepower, a figure a modern hatchback would be ashamed of, and it could not have cared less. The secret is the same old recipe, done exactly right: a heavy cast iron block. A simple rotary injection pump you can almost understand just by looking at it. Conservative tuning, built before the emissions scandal that dragged the brand through the mud, with so little electronics on it that there is almost nothing there to throw a tantrum. What that simplicity buys you is fuel economy and mileage that both sound like misprints. These little engines will return 45, even close to 50 miles to the gallon if you have a gentle right foot, and 300,000 miles on one is common as dirt. A shop up in Canada once took one of these apart with 720,000 kilometers on the clock, an engine that had not exactly been babbied, and they were astonished at how little wear they found inside. The little 1.9 asks for only 2 things in return, and you ignore them at your peril. Change the timing belt on time, religiously every 100,000 miles or so, and by the calendar as well, because if that belt snaps, it bends every valve in the head and the day is finished. And give it an honest highway run now and then to clear its throat. There is a later version, the so-called pump injector, that makes a bit more power, but is fussier about its oil and harder on its camshaft. So if you want the truly bulletproof one, you want the earlier ALH. Look after it, and the tortoise crosses every finish line it ever starts. Let me give you one story about this engine that I still tell to this day, because it tells you everything about how tough and how simple the little 1.9 really is. Years ago, I had a friend, a thrifty man, who got it into his head that diesel at the pump was daylight robbery. So all through the warm months, he started pouring plain sunflower oil from the supermarket straight into the tank of his old Passat, the one with the 1.9 under the bonnet. It was cooking oil, the very same bottle his wife fried with on a Sunday. And the maddening thing, the thing I would not have believed if I had not driven behind it myself, is that it ran. It started on a cold morning, it pulled cleanly, it carried him to work and back without a single complaint, and the only way the whole street knew what he was up to was the smell. Sit behind that Passat at the lights and the air smelled like a donut shop. Now, I am not telling you to feed your car out of the kitchen cupboard, and I would never dream of trying that trick in deep cold or in some fussy modern common rail engine, but the simple fact that the old 1.9 would even tolerate it and just keep on going is the whole legend wrapped up in one daft story. That is what a cast iron block and a plain rotary pump actually buy you. It is the kind of engine too stubborn and too simple to care what you pour in it. That is the 1.9, the tortoise that always crosses the line, and if a legend like that only earns the number 3 spot, you can imagine the company waiting above it. The 2 engines I trust more than any diesel ever bolted together are both straight 6s, both built when the engineers still won the argument against the accountants. One of them is a tuner's idol that shrugs off 400,000 kilometers and asks for more. The other has almost nothing inside it that can fail, and it is the only engine on this whole list I am willing to call truly immortal. So let me give you both of them now, starting with the tuner's idol and the single cheap part that can still bring it down if you miss it. Number 2 is the BMW M57, a 3-liter inline 6 diesel that BMW built from the year 2000 into roughly 2010 and dropped into the cars that made their reputation: the 330d, the 530d, the 730d limousine, the X3 and the X5. Land Rover even borrowed it for the Range Rover, which tells you exactly how the engineers across the channel rated it. Depending on the version, it made anywhere from 180 horsepower up to nearly 300 in the hottest ones, and the block does not flinch at any of it. There is a reason an inline 6 runs so sweet and lasts so long. It is naturally balanced with no shake to hammer its own bearings to death, so it can spin for hundreds of thousands of miles without beating itself apart. This is also why the M57 is a tuner's idol. The bottom end is so strong that people chase 80 extra horsepower out of a laptop and the engine just shrugs and asks what else you have got. Out in the real world, 400,000 kilometers on a well-kept M57 is a story you hear at every diesel meet, not a miracle you read about once. Before I tell you the one weak spot, let me say the quiet part out loud. If a video like this is saving you from a $5,000 mistake at the auction, the little subscribe button is how the channel keeps the lights on, and it costs you nothing at all. That is the whole pitch, and I will not mention it again. Back to the engine. The thing that can ruin a perfectly good M57 is almost too small to take seriously, and that is exactly why so many of them die young. Inside the intake sit little plastic swirl flaps, butterfly valves that spin the incoming air for cleaner running at low speed. They were a clever idea on a drawing board. In the real world, the plastic goes brittle with heat and age, a flap snaps off its spindle, and the engine inhales it straight into a cylinder. From there it is carnage, bent valves and gouged pistons, and the head coming off on my bench. The fix is so cheap, it is almost insulting. A set of solid aluminum blanking plugs the swirl flap delete the diesel crowd has done for 20 years, and the danger is simply gone forever. One thing worth knowing when you shop: on some of the early cars only the automatics got the flaps, so the manuals can be safer, but the only way to be sure is to look, buy an M57, do the swirl flaps that same weekend before you trust it with a long trip, keep the oil clean and the exhaust gas valve healthy, and you have one of the finest diesel engines ever to leave Bavaria. And now, number 1. The engine I called immortal, and I chose that word with great care. The Mercedes OM606, a 3-liter inline 6 diesel that Mercedes built from 1993 to around 2001 and never quite managed to replace in the hearts of the people who truly know. It lived in the W124 and the W210E class, the big W140S class as the S300 turbo diesel, and the G-Wagon that the army and the farmer and the desert overlander all swore by. The early Sprinter vans carried a detuned version that fleets ran into the ground and simply could not kill. Here is what makes the 606 different from everything else on this list, and from almost everything built since. The block is cast iron and overbuilt, the crankshaft is forged, and the heart of it, on the versions that earned the legend, is a Bosch mechanical injection pump. Sit with that word for a moment. Mechanical. There is no clever electronic injector to fail, no fuel rail at impossible pressure, no module hiding in a corner to corrode and strand you. The fuel is pushed by a pump that a careful man could rebuild on his kitchen table. With nothing more than honest oil changes, these engines pass 500,000 miles without coming apart. 500,000, not kilometers, miles. The tuning crowd has pulled 500 horsepower out of this block with the right turbo and held it together, and the long-distance drivers have simply pointed them at the horizon for decade after decade. It is so beloved that people pull these engines out of rusted-out old sedans and swap them into G-Wagons, and even into much older classic cars, just to put an immortal heart into a car they refuse to give up on. If you want a diesel that will be running long after the chrome has fallen off the body around it, this is the one. It is the only engine here I am willing to call truly immortal, and after 30 years on the floor I have earned the right to say it. One more thing about the 606, because it explains why grown men go quiet and sentimental over a diesel. In its plain, naturally aspirated form, it made only about 134 horsepower, and the turbocharged version in the later E300 turbo diesel lifted that to around 175. Neither figure will win a single traffic light, and neither figure is remotely the point. That mechanical pump does not care if it is 40 below in a Norwegian winter, or baking on a road in the Sahara, and it does not much care whether the fuel it is handed is clean or filthy. That is exactly why you find these engines crossing deserts and whole continents under people who cannot afford to break down 1,000 kilometers from the nearest town. If the world ever ends, I am fairly sure the cockroaches will be driving an OM606, and they will be filling it from a rusty jerry can. So now you have all 5. Let me give you the part that is worth more than the list itself, which is how to actually buy one of these without getting burned, because a great engine in a neglected car is still a very bad morning. When you go to look at any of them, ignore the shine on the paint and go straight for the paperwork. A thick folder of receipts is worth more than a spotless dashboard every time. Then start the engine stone cold and walk around to the back. A little grey haze that clears in seconds is fine. Blue smoke that hangs in the air means oil is getting somewhere it should not be. White smoke that lingers points a finger straight at the injectors. While it idles, listen for a rattle in the first second or two, which on a chain engine can be a tire tensioner. Then pull the dipstick and actually smell the oil. If it smells like a filling station, diesel is leaking past a tired injector or a tired pump, and the oil is being thinned out, and look under the oil filler cap for a thick beige sludge, which is the calling card of a car that only ever did short cold trips and never once warmed all the way through. And do not hand over a cent for any diesel without driving it properly hot first. Take it out, get it up to temperature, and give it one firm pull up through the gears on a clear stretch of road. A healthy engine surges forward clean and strong and keeps the temperature needle planted dead in the middle. A tired one hesitates, or coughs out a cloud of black soot, or lets that needle drift toward the red, and every one of those is the car quietly telling you the truth the seller never will. And once it is yours, the rules are simple enough to write on the back of your hand. Change the oil more often than the manual dares to suggest. The factory wants long intervals so the car looks cheap to run on the showroom floor. You and I both know that a diesel worked hard deserves fresh oil every 8 to 10,000 kilometers. With a proper full synthetic that meets the maker's own specification, not the cheapest bottle on the shelf. Do the timing belt, or watch the timing chain by the calendar, not just by the mileage, because rubber and plastic age whether the car moves or not. Drive it far enough, often enough to get it properly hot and burn off the moisture and the soot. And when you have given a turbo diesel a hard run, let it idle for a quiet minute before you switch it off, so the oil in the turbo settles instead of cooking itself black. 2 more small habits separate the cars that die at 200,000 from the ones that sail clean past 500,000. The first is the fuel filter. A diesel injection system, mechanical or modern, lives or dies on clean fuel, and a fresh quality filter at every service is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy against a wrecked pump or a ruined set of injectors. The second is the coolant. The part everybody forgets because the engine never asks for it out loud. An iron block is tough, but it still quietly rusts from the inside if you run tired coolant for 10 years straight, so change it on schedule with the proper anti-corrosion type and keep the inside of that block as healthy as the outside still looks. Do those 2 cheap things alongside the oil, and you have closed off almost every common road these engines ever take to an early grave. That is the whole secret, and it is not really a secret at all. These 5 engines were built by people who still believed a car should last, in a narrow window of years before the bean counters won the argument, and everything went thin and clever and disposable. An iron block, a simple way to get the fuel in, and a quiet life of low early torque. Look after one of these the way it was meant to be looked after, and it will not just outlast the loan. It will outlast the car, the fashion, and most of the engines they are building today with a straight face and a 5-year warranty. If this helped you, pass it along to the one person you know who is about to spend real money on a used diesel before they make the wrong choice. This is Fritz. Keep them clean, keep them fed, and I will see you on the far side of 500,000 kilometers.